That's the ultimate aim of individuation and of enlightenment, that you understand these principles from within. They arise and are born from within you. You don't need that external punisher or reward from the outside world.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Soul Sessions with Creative Mind. I'm Deborah Burnt Maldonado, and I'm here with Dr. Rob Maldonado, and we are so excited about our topic today. We are ending our series on the great minds of psychology. There's so many people we didn't touch on, but we couldn't do one without talking about Carl Jung. So we're going to get into that today. But before we begin, I would love for you to click the button in the corner if you're watching us on YouTube and subscribe to our channel so you don't miss a single episode. And you want to go back to the series and see all the great content that we put out weeks before leading up to this, as well as future episodes. And if you're listening to us on Spotify or iTunes, make sure you click subscribe on your little phone so that you make sure you get every episode of Soul Sessions and join the fun topics here today. So Rob, did Jung contribute anything to psychology or the world? Did he have maybe a little impact?
Yeah, he's got potential, let's say.
Who is this Carl Jung character?
Yes, so this comes full circle because really Jung has been an inspiration to so many people and in so many ways, and people that don't even realize that they're using some of his ideas, of course. Like
his terms, people hear the terms, but they don't realize, oh, that's Jung's idea.
That's right. Yeah, so Carl Gustav Jung, he was trained kind of as a psychiatrist. At that time, they were still defining the profession.
They didn't have coaching back then.
They didn't have coaching, except in sports, of course. That goes back to ancient Greece and even before that. But yeah, he initially kind of trained as a psychiatrist and was very involved in kind of clinical work with severe mental health problems, stuff that we would now call psychotic problems like schizophrenia, and
serious mental disorders,
and mental disorders. And through that work, he became familiar with Freud's work and started corresponding. And this is early 1900s, turn of the century.
And he joined Freud's Psychoanalytic Society?
He eventually joined, and Freud was ready to hand over the reins of that group to Jung.
His son, right?
Yeah, he was considering him as his heir and son. But at that time, there was a break, and Jung went his own way. Which
I think is normal, because if he came up with individuation, he had to carve his own path.
Yeah, absolutely. The break occurred in around 1913, somewhere around that time. And from then on, he pretty much was on his own, developed his own analytical psychology. So now he's known in psychology as well as psychiatry. But he's also a philosopher and a great writer.
And an artist.
Yeah, so these are some of his contributions, and just to name a few. Certainly, contributions to psychology. His idea of introvert, extrovert, which is kind of a personality theory. Philosophy. How do we look at science, and how do we integrate science into a human understanding?
Also, the spiritual aspect of philosophy, like they see the human beyond just their behavior and what they're presenting, but seeing that there's a spiritual aspect of human being.
Yeah. So comparative religion, comparative spirituality, comparative mythology.
Rituals.
Yes. Joseph Campbell, we would not have Joseph Campbell without Jung's work. Dream psychology. He was heavy into understanding dreams and using dreams as a way to connect with deeper aspects of the psyche. Understanding creativity and art. Many writers, directors, artists understand or at least look at his work as a way of understanding their own creative process and understanding what the meaning of the art they create and that other people create means for society.
I mean, a lot of the actors take shadow work classes because it's all about like pulling up parts of themselves that they have to bring to that character. And also, do you think they know, some of them don't know Jung, but unconsciously they're creating like the hero's journey, like Campbell said, it's just all these myths. There's this archetypal, like universal patterns that show up in writing that that even some of the writers aren't conscious of, that they're bringing in these kind of themes that Jung talked about intuitively.
Yeah, that's a good argument to make, of course.
Was it Jung? Did Jung come first or the writer come first?
Yes. Eastern philosophy. Our understanding of Eastern philosophy would not be where it's at if it wasn't for his work. He was one of the first ones to really seriously look from a psychological perspective at what Eastern philosophy was talking about.
And also making it Western, like how Westerners should work with Eastern philosophy, because if you take in all the rituals from the East, it's not your culture. And he wrote The Secret of the Golden Flower, where he talks about that you can't just adopt a Eastern religion. If you're conditioned and you're living in a Western world, you have to make it your own and practical for yourself in where you're at to make it really work, or else it feels disjointed.
That's right.
Alchemy?
Yeah, but looking at the West, right, you have the tradition of alchemy, which had been forgotten for a long time until he revived it by giving it validity and saying, yeah, this is interesting, and let's look at this because these are our Western roots that we shouldn't ignore. There's valuable things in here. The scientific community had pretty much dismissed alchemy as superstition and kind of the what came before chemistry and real science. And he said, no, there are things in here that are important for understanding our development as Western philosophy.
And also, if you think of the base metals turning into gold, it's sort of what we do in transformation. It's an alchemical process of this psychic energies. And he tied it to a lot of what's happening in the psyche that makes us transform, that makes us become something different, to grow and individuate.
Absolutely. And then, of course, understanding of the unconscious mind, which was still, we're still debating and we're still kind of finding out what is it that he was pointing at when he kind of defined the personal unconscious and then went deeper into what he called the collective unconscious. You know,
I didn't really understand the unconscious mind until I started studying Jung. I thought it was like a computer. And then also, too, you can't really see the unconscious. No matter how self-aware you become, all you can see is what you retrieved from it, but you can never look at it directly. And that idea that you can see your unconscious is not, or a coach or a therapist can see your unconscious. It's more like you're seeing what's pointing to it, but not really. You never really can see it directly because it's unseen. And understanding that idea, that how do we bring out through symbolism and dream interpretation and living that symbolic life, how do we work with this part of ourselves that we can't see? Well, one of the things you forgot to talk about is archetypes in Jung, the term archetype.
Yes.
Yeah, that was, just this idea, this concept that there's these universal patterns that show up in what I like to, what fascinates me is about culture and society. And you put group of people in a room and how they all take on an archetype. Or like we talked about, the screenplays, people writing movies, and the archetypes just kind of come alive in those, in the writing. These characters come alive and they all have certain roles and certain expressions, and where do they come from? Where's the template? And it's that universal template from which we create that archetypal level. So very fascinating. It's, at first I used to think archetypes were personality types. When I first started thinking about what that is, like the brand archetypes, because I was in marketing for so many years. It's like, oh, I'm the hero and I'm the victim and I'm the, everyday person, or I'm the, guru. It's so much deeper than just a personality. And so studying Jung and understanding the complexity and also the depth of the study of archetypes is really profound.
Yeah, if we want to kind of expand on all his work, we'd have to do a whole series on it.
It's like you said, Jung is like reading the Bible. There's so many ways and branches of people that study Jung and have their own take on it and have taken the work to the next level. And some are in the medical model, and then we're really moving toward, we're establishing our interpretation of his work in a coaching model. But so, Rob, tell me about because you introduced me to Jung, so your story should come first. What was that first experience like for you approaching his ideas?
I liberated one of his books very early on from a library that was pretty close to the house where I grew up in Texas, and it was the Portable Jung, and it was actually edited by Joseph Campbell. So in that book, Joseph Campbell lays out Jung's work systematically as a way of looking at the evolution of his thoughts. So I started reading it for myself, and I had read the Gita before then. I must have been about 14, 15. So for me, it was the first glimpse of another mind looking at psychology and the world in a particular way that I resonated with. I had never read anything like that except maybe for Hermann Hesse, who wrote Damien and Steppenwolf and Siddhartha. But here was an actual profession, an actual way of living in the world and making a living in the world dedicated to this understanding of the mind this way.
Did you want to be a psychologist at that point?
Oh, of course. Yeah. He was my mentor in written form, right? Because that's the great thing about books, that you have access to somebody's mind thinking right there in the page, and they communicate to you how they see the world, how they see the mind. So for a long time, he served as my mentor and my guide. Not that I was interested in emulating his life so much, but...
Thank God, in some ways.
Yeah, but he was a human being, and he was definitely a product of his time, right? So it doesn't make sense for me to want to be a Victorian physician the way he was. But the approach to the mind is what's important, right? How do you think about the mind, and how do you think about your own experience and consciousness? And
you also had a mentor after you became a psychologist or were training as a psychologist who was a Jungian analyst. And so do you think she revitalized inspired your, invigorated your taste for Jung and wanting to learn more or go deeper into it?
Oh, absolutely. The people that I ended up training with in academia and in clinical practice were a huge influence on me. But I had already formed it. I already had absorbed most of Jung's ideas before I went to university. So I had that mindset already. And then once I was in university, I understood that, there's been a lot of advances in psychology since Jung's time. So I became very interested in what's new. And I was free to do that because I already had his ideas as a template for how to approach the mind. Yeah. So even if I was learning neuroscience, I was approaching it with a Jungian mindset.
When I watched you, when we first met, you were a psychologist working with kids, and the things you were doing and how you explained how to work with them was so different than what I would assume a child therapist would do. There was something deeper, more profound that you brought, and I think that is because you had the Jungian foundation, and you were able to see something a little deeper than someone who just was traditionally trained without that foundation, like more of the West, kind of more of the, you brought more of the Eastern philosophy or spiritual knowledge into your approach to working with kids.
Yeah, that's right. Because Jung, it's considered, his psychology is considered pretty much the foundation of depth psychology. So what went on to become all the schools that look deeper into the psyche, into the unconscious mind, which is now called depth psychology or transpersonal psychology. So he was the godfather of all that. Unfortunately, he's also considered the father of the New Age movement, which is fine, right? It's kind of people taking some of these ideas and kind of using them for their own purposes. But if you really study his work, and I did for many years and continue to study his work, he was always warning us to not just emulate other cultures or even himself, right?
Don't be a Jungian, he says.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Don't necessarily be a Jungian, but think for yourself.
Kind of like Buddha, like don't put a statue up of me. The same kind of idea.
Yeah, so his mentoring was this idea that you should find the knowledge and the wisdom that you see in other cultures and in other spiritual traditions, find those things in yourself.
Yeah.
Not just emulate them because they're there or the way other people have been doing them, but definitely you can study them and read them. And he, he obviously learned a lot from Eastern psychology. We see it in the concept of the self and his use of active imagination, very similar to meditation. But
even dream work, isn't there like dream yoga as well? Like as far as like on the East, they talk about dreams.
Absolutely, yes.
And even this Christian, Joseph had the dreams.
He said people forget that God primarily speaks to people through dreams. So his attitude was all those things are still alive in us, but in putting them into practice, he says you have to make them your own and in your own time. In your own time,
in your own kind of a culture and your own thing so that you can relate to, versus trying to jump into something else and like perform the ritual without embodying it.
Yes. So he was critical of people that try to emulate other cultures, like Eastern or Native American or other traditional cultures, and simply kind of renounce their own, right? He says, that's like saying, I am bereft of any real wisdom. I have to import it from somewhere else.
And his whole thing, whole concept was integration, meaning we're not getting rid of anything. It's like we have in us indigenous knowledge in the collective unconscious, but we want to integrate it into our current reality, not switch and swap personas, but really like how do we integrate and even discover that in internal, deep instinctual wisdom that we were born with, and find it inside. And I think if I'd argue to say that sometimes people don't know how to get it, and that's why they're drawn to these other cultures, because there's something in there that calls to them. But then the next step is, okay, learn that, understand that, but now how can I find within myself? Don't push away your own culture, your own identity to just be something else, and then you're kind of still pushing something away, and that just goes into your shadow, and it's still going to affect you, as we talked about. Yeah.
Well, that's a good point, but it's mainly that you're simply creating a persona of spirituality. That now you are a spiritual persona, but the persona, he says, that's not really who you are. So you're integrating or you're using these spiritual traditions as a way to build up a spiritual appearing persona, that you appear to be spiritual, but you're not really finding them within yourself. So that's his great message. And of course, it's very relevant for today's generation that now we're in a new era of AI and kind of a world culture now, that his ideas are really important to understand so that we can use them as a map, as a guide as to what do we do with this new understanding that we have of intelligence and culture and society.
Well, I could tell you when I started out in life having, I think a lot of people can relate to this. You have as a child, these mystical experiences, these waking dreams, very, very lucid dreams. And I had this wild imagination, and I would have a dream and then I would write it and make it a story. And I was the character in the story a lot of times. And I had this wild, like kind of inner resource. And I couldn't, as a kid, wait to go to sleep because I really wanted to see what was what's the next step in this story that was unfolding. And so I had this really rich inner world, and I even had this like idea to look beyond what's possible. Like everyone else, and I feel like in my family was very practical, and I was the one, the dreamer. And so what is that about me that calls upon me to do something more and to have more than, and not just settle. And so early in life, I did a lot of exploration. I mean, first I was raised Roman Catholic, so my religion was God is dictating, I have to follow the rules. And then as I got into my 20s, I just started looking at personal development. And the first thing that shifted for me is like, oh, your thoughts create your life. And I said, oh, well, that's a big change in perspective here. And it took me on a journey for a while, like a decade of searching for, almost over a decade of searching for the answer. And I think everyone needs to go on that search. Everyone needs to kind of play with all the kind of the new age stuff and, kind of dabble in all these different like spiritual concepts that are from other cultures. And then what happened for me was that I met you, and I kind of had an idea of what the unconscious was. I was trained as a hypnotherapist, so I was thinking, oh, you just reprogram your unconscious. And if you want to be more positive, you just got to reprogram your brain and then just be confident. But when I met you and I had this experience of my shadow for I think the second time, the first time I had an experience of shadow, but I didn't know what it was. But the second time you kind of showed me this map that it came from Jung psychology about the unconscious, and you're projecting it onto another person. And I never thought of it that way. Like I kept thinking, well, it's my mind that's perceiving, but it's actually more of a projection. Like it's just a different level of understanding how the psyche works. And I remember it was a conflict in my life that I was trying to deal with. And well, up until that point, I had to deal with it externally. I had to go and like make things happen, communicate with people, keep boundaries. And this one I did solely like through your guidance, as with your great kind of idea of this Jungian way to look at things. And it was the first time I made a complete inner transformation, and the external just shifted. It was like the first time I really got a direct experience of it. And then, of course, we studied Jung together. We first met, and I started reading his books and eat more Eastern philosophy. And I started to understand all those mystical experiences I had as a kid, all the dreams I had, all the, even the visualizations that I would these worlds I would create in my visualizations and my imagination, understand the symbolism of it. I mean, I would have dreams. I wrote down, like I have journals of them. And now I can go back and look. And I remember some of them. We all have those dreams that we just that stick with us. I'm like, oh my God, that's what the dream was telling me. And it puts it in a completely different context where I could use it versus, oh, I guess that was a dream about finding love. No, it's about something much deeper and much more profound. So for me, as a lay person who didn't study psychology, who didn't go the traditional route of becoming a therapist and a psychologist, I found it very approachable in a way that made it scientific. Like there's the theory behind it, but also incorporates the mysticism, which I didn't want to be just a sterile kind of coach that just says, let's think of your goals and let's talk it through. I wanted to do rich work, but I needed that framework that was easy to apply in my life. And it's actually very practical if we understand how to work with it. And so for me, it's been a game changer in my life. Anytime there's a conflict or something that's not working for me, the first place I look is inside. I don't try to rearrange the furniture in the world. I try to go inside and say, what is this my mind is telling me? And that has been such a powerful way of being, because your power is within you. And then also, even more than just like manifesting things, I am actually getting more joy out of just knowing who I am, knowing the depth of my psyche, and just like have this intimate inner world that wouldn't be possible without Jung giving us a guide, giving us a map to what we're really experiencing in a very symbolic way. So you're not getting into superstition and, making up stuff about what it means. You're really realizing that you are creating your own reality in a deep way.
Yeah, it's an incredible way to see the mind and to see the world. So his idea of that we are not the persona, of course, it goes counter to Western culture in general, because in Western culture we're taught that your personality, who you think you are, and your behaviors and how you present yourself, is who you are, and that you should improve this quality, this personality, to the utmost.
Because you want to impress people and win friends and influence people.
That's right. And of course, there's nothing wrong with that. Jung says that is true up to a certain point. At midlife, or what he called midlife was really in your mid-20s, because people didn't live as long in at that time. You should start to really consider, who am I? Beyond the mask, beyond the persona that I'm, the role that I play in society.
Well, in Western psychology, you hear people often, those who've gone through therapy, they identify as their diagnosis a lot of times, or they identify as the experiences they had as a childhood. Like, I'm a survivor of this, or I'm an adopted child, or, and they kind of create their whole identity around the past and that. And then if you are, of course, those are good things to look at and to process. But if you stay stuck in that identity that happened 10, 20, 30 years ago, there's no room for you to be anything else.
That's right.
And that's what he was saying, is like, you're not throwing away that part. You're just seeing there's more to you than just that. There's so much more to you. And what we end up doing is collapsing our possibilities into this one identity that is, most people do. I mean, this is like a normal ego function to create this identity. And so Jung says the next stage in our life is to really break away from that conditioned self to really connecting and going toward the universal self, where he calls it the self.
Yeah, because at the end of the day, if you consider what is the function of ego, well, it's to help us survive and create this persona that helps us fit in socially. But beyond that, if you stay stuck in the ego, you're essentially kind of still in your childhood, right? That idea of the eternal boy and the eternal girl that we talked about, that he came up with, and then von Franz developed it further.
It's like you're living back there. You're still living in the past.
That's right.
And hurting yourself, like you're suffering.
Not only that, you're hurting the world, essentially, because if you look at today's leaders, today's politicians, and today's people who are in power, and you consider that they're operating from ego, this means they're like toddlers, essentially. They're like, if they don't get their way, they throw a tantrum. If they
invade a country.
Yeah, their aim is essentially to gain more power, more control, so that their ego feels more secure and protected. In other words, they're acting out of very primal, very elemental parts of the psyche, instead of from that enlightenment aspect of the mind that is capable.
Well, wouldn't you say it's like they, we always say that they're not consciously choosing this. They're not consciously wanting to be a bully or a tyrant, or even, just like you said, just reacting and being, kind of drama. It's really their conditioning. And so they're not really aware, they think that's who they are, or they think that's the only way they can be, in a way. And they're powerless to change if they don't realize that they're not consciously choosing that there's another way. So individuation, facing shadow in all that, like every world leader should do shadow work. I would say that it would solve many of the conflicts in the world, because most of it is that projection onto the other person, making them wrong. And it's like kind of displacing their own like self-hate or limitations on other people and blaming them for it. And then then you see cultures and groups have like certain missions, and it's like us versus them mentality. And that's not really a way to work. Or to solve any problem, is to be fighting all the time. It's like, where could we find our common humanity? Where can both sides look and see who they are beyond the persona? And that's where the common ground could be, not just, well, what do we agree on? Let's work with that, but more like who we are, like as human beings. And I think sometimes too, when let's think of I remember times like 9/11. I remember when that happened to our country, and I grew up in the New York area, and New York City is not known for people that are loving. Everyone's kind of short and direct. And a friend of mine was working in New York at the time, and she said, "You're not going to believe how loving everyone was." And I think as a country, for a very short time, maybe like a day, we were all united in a way, because we all felt like we were all feeling the same thing. And then, of course, everything gets divided again. But imagine that if all of humanity had a united mission of love and understanding and non-judgment, and also working on your own stuff and understanding what you're projecting, it would change the world.
Absolutely. Yeah, there's an interview with Jung on YouTube, and we'll post the link to some of his interviews, where they ask him, what do you recommend for human society and our modern world? And he says, well, we have to understand the psyche. We know more about the moon than our own psyche. And what if something goes wrong in our mind? What if, these dangers are coming from within us, not from natural disasters? And sure enough, right, if you look at where have all the disasters in human culture and human society come from our own minds, meaning from our psyches.
Well, that's an interesting point, because we're hearing, like you and I've been watching the progression of AI, and a lot of fear around it's going to destroy humanity. But AI is really consciousness like us. It's a consciousness where it's the same psyche. I mean, man built AI. So how would you see that as, like, to dispel the fear? It's almost like we can create, AI will mirror what we are in a way.
Yeah, which is dangerous, of course.
I know, well, that's what I mean. That's why we need to individuate, because the fear is that, this AI thing is out of control. But no one's saying humanity's mind is not, conscious. Right. I mean, that's the question. Like, they're afraid of this super consciousness taking over. And it's like, well, what we need to do is work on our consciousness. So we can, it will mirror back our highest and our best nature, right? Instead of our worst nature.
Right. From the Jungian perspective, technology is an amplification or an extension of our psyche.
Yeah.
So it's nothing really foreign or external to us, because we're the ones that are creating it. But it does amplify. It can amplify, just like we can build hospitals and schools. We can also build bombs and pollution. So it's the same principle with this new technology. It can amplify our
worst nature.
The base elements in us, our greed, our fear, our need for power, or it can express something much higher, the spiritual tendencies in us.
The oneness.
Yes.
I think if you all you're one, if you know that at the center of your being is exactly the same as someone else, and you know you're one, you wouldn't hurt anyone, because you would see yourself in that other person. But we don't see ourselves in other people. We don't see the light in other people. We see our conditioned self, what it sees, what it's been taught to see, and their personas. And we're working on this ego persona level with each other and not really seeing each other as we really are.
Yeah. Jung has this interesting perspective that he saw that through our technology, we're trying to be as gods, essentially, right? Like in the old mythologies, right? That we're stealing the fire from the gods, the knowledge from the gods, and that we run the risk of being punished by the gods because of that. So we're playing out that scenario, right? That now we're playing with creating new life forms through manipulating the DNA code, or creating artificial intelligence by creating learning machines.
Or 3D experiences where people are buying property in a virtual reality, which is what this is, by the way. It's not different.
That's right.
Yeah, but understanding that, right?
But then the fear arises in us that, oh my God, who's in control, right?
Yeah.
We might be punished for playing with these godlike qualities.
It's going to take over, like the Terminator. It's going to become self-aware and destroy all humanity.
Yes, but he says that's primarily because we're split against ourselves.
Yeah,
we've divided our psyche into persona, waking world, and the unconscious mind, the shadow that we're not aware of. So he says, if you want to correct that, you have to individuate. You have to integrate both the conscious and the unconscious mind. In other words, become aware and accept the unconscious elements in the psyche. If you don't do that, they're always going to show up as these out of control external forces that you cannot control.
Well, one of the things that you mentioned to me when we were first dating in the early days, which was kind of mind-blowing, because when I was trained as a hypnotherapist, it was like change your positive into negative. And what you were saying is that you're just flipping things around, and then you're putting the negative in, like suppressing the negative, which doesn't get rid of it. And it creates more. So the more you prop up positive, the more you're creating more negative, like at the same time, because you can't have one half of something. And I thought that was really fascinating to think about, because we all think, I want the world to be a peaceful place. I want the world to be great. I don't want mean people in the world. And so it's almost like we have to come to terms with our own, not badness, but all the things that we push away, our own greed and our own wanting to be the center of attention, and our own, like, that the need to get back at people, like where we, there's this, all these like deep human tendencies in us that's been imprinted in us from the beginning of humanity, that we're carrying with us. And the more we make them conscious, then we can choose. So we're not just programming ourselves to be positive, but we're actually seeing both sides of the spectrum and allowing them both to stand there. Like von Franz said, to stand in the tension of the opposites helps us make that new choice. So we're not just clinging to the positive and pushing away the negative. We're actually saying, let's look at both sides and see that both of them aren't real. And then what do we want to create, where we're not pushing anything away or grasping? And then that's where the Eastern philosophy comes in, that non-dual philosophy. And Jung, that's what he talks about. The persona shadow is this dualistic energy of the ego, and then it's carried out in the culture of good and bad, us and them. And how do we bring into that oneness? And to me, oneness was such a hard concept. Yeah. You hear it so much, you're one with everything, but like, I think just training and understanding, just even taking the shadow step toward individuation, working with your shadow, you start to see how connected you are to other people and how much more alike you are with people even that you disagree with. And that is really where healing happens in a culture and society, is that we start to see ourselves in others and be accepting of their own conditioned nature, and know that they're not doing it intentionally, that they're doing it out of a pattern, just like you.
Yeah, Jung says something like, if you want to understand other people's darkness, you have to understand your own first. And that's the hardest concept for human beings, right? To really embody this idea that if you want to change the world, if you want to make improvements, then you have to start with yourself.
Yeah.
Because the tendency for us is to see the world and say, yeah, I can see the problem, right? It's out there, or they are the problem. But we don't want to say,
I am the problem.
or I'm contributing to the problem, not the solution, by being divided, by being judgmental of myself and others. So we have to start with ourselves. And luckily, Jung lays out this individuation process very clearly. Well, maybe not so clearly, but that's why
we took it on ourselves to create a map in a coaching model to help people. Everyday people experience this profound mystical.
Yeah, that's right. Side. Because the higher knowledge, let's say the knowledge of Eastern philosophy, of the oneness, of the true nature of reality, has been around forever. But if you read it, it kind of leaves you puzzled as to, well, how do I do this? Do I just believe it? Do I just intellectualize it?
It's kind of like a high concept. It's like this kind of big general concept that we're following versus something that you can actually experience directly through working with it.
Yes, and so Jung's idea of individuation gives you a way to directly transform your perception so that you can perceive that reality directly for yourself. In other words, it's not about believing, like he says. When they asked him, do you believe in God? He said, I don't believe, I know. I have a direct perception, a direct experience of it. That's what he wants us to do through individuation, is to have a direct experience of that oneness ourselves. But it begins by self-inquiry, self-examination, integrating your own shadow. Then you can move on to helping others and helping the world.
Shadow work is just the beginning, and it's becoming very popular right now, but it really is it's just the first step. You don't want to stop there. You want to keep going, because the great part of Jung's work is beyond that. The shadow work, he says, is the apprentice piece. And he said, when you start working with archetypes in the collective unconscious, that's the masterpiece. And that's really who we are, is this masterpiece.
Yeah.
So I have a thought experiment for you, Rob. Let's imagine that there is a group of 100 people, who all did individuation, and they were on an island in the middle of nowhere, and they created a culture with 100% individuated people, what would that look like for that small island culture, cut off from electronics? They couldn't interact with anyone else. Of course, we know that everyone's connected, but in a way where we can kind of, we had an experiment where what would happen to a society? What would you imagine that life would be like on that island?
Yeah. Well, first of all, it wouldn't mean that they wouldn't have challenges or kind of everyday problems or situations. It's what they would do with those problems and situations and how they would approach them. Because if through individuation, you learn that you are the world. The world that you're perceiving is created through your own mind. In other words, you're seeing your psyche as the world. And so when others confront you, when others trigger you, when problems arise in interrelationships or interpersonal relationships, then you see them in the right context, that here's an opportunity for me to become more aware, to make the parts of my unconscious that are perhaps reflected in that conflict part of my work, part of my internal work.
And it would be welcome. That conflict would be welcome because it was an opportunity to deepen the growth. I also think too that when people make mistakes, you know, in our culture, I mean, we have to have rules, and someone who made a mistake, you know, like stole something as a kid, or, you know, got caught up in a gang, or someone who, you know, cheated on their spouse, or, you know, maybe didn't handle their parenting very well. To not, instead of judging them, instead of, you know, punishing them, there's a more openness to what caused this situation to occur. And there's more of a curiosity and non-judgment around it, so that person can remember the truth of who they are and understand that their actions are through conditioning. And I just think the world, I mean, that little island would be, I think, the closest thing to heaven, because it doesn't mean that you're floating on clouds and everything's perfect, but you're all taking responsibility. And there's, even in a conflict, you're not avoiding conflict and not trying to keep peace, but you're more aware, so you can have deeper relationships. I also think the love relationships would be amazing. People really having true intimacy, and friendships being true friendships, parent-child relationships being so empowered. And even what we can do together as human beings with the power of our imagination, and what kind of functions they would create, and societies, you know, in that island would, the way buildings are made and the way they live would be completely different than a competitive world that we have now, and how they would, you know, care about the land and care about animals and all these things that, you know, only like people do in pockets. But I just can imagine that dream society. And maybe it's a dream, but it's something to think about. Like that, if you do your work, and you'll find yourself wanting to be around people like you that have individuated. And then I think the more we can help people individuate, I mean, that's why we have our business and training coaches to have people wake everyone up and see who they are. Eventually, I think there's going to be these cultures the leaders that rise above the noise and the conflict, and we'll see a different type of leader in the world. Different types of ways to do government, different type of ways to handle society conflicts, and dealing with the challenges we have in the world right now in a more conscious way. So it's a dream. I'm a dreamer.
My favorite philosopher, Lao Tse, says, when we need moral codes, right, like the Ten Commandments or religious dictums to guide our behavior, he says that's good. But better, he says, is to know those things from the inside, that you understand, why is it better to treat people like you would like to be treated? Why is it better to take care of the earth and cultivate good things? Like,
do not kill. Like, you should feel that. Like, that
from
should,
within,
it's like, I don't need to read it and go, ooh, I shouldn't kill. I better not do that.
That's it.
Yeah.
That's the ultimate aim of individuation and of enlightenment, that you understand these principles from within. They arise and are born from within you. You don't need that external punisher or reward from the outside world.
Yeah, beautiful. Well, we're going to dream about our Jung Island, Individuation Island. That should be a good reality show. Maybe we should pitch that, the Individuation Island. And really, I think that would be an interesting experiment, just to put a bunch of people on an island. And
well, we're on a planet island.
That's
essentially
true.
out in space. So,
but I would like to start with maybe a few individuals like we're doing right now in our courses and our trainings, to invite people. And then that ripple effect, all our coaches that are graduating our program are going out and making this impact on the world. It's not just about, finding the right partner or making money or finding the right career. It's like you're having a more profound effect on humanity, on a deep, profound way, every person you touch, every session you have. So I'd like to dedicate this to our graduates of our program and who are doing this work and making it possible that every island, that dream island, is in every city around the world. Wouldn't that be beautiful?
That's right.
Yes.
Yeah.
All right. Well, have a great rest of your day. I want to, before we go, remind you to click the button here if you're watching us on YouTube to subscribe to our channel, and click the little bell to get the reminders when a new episode comes on. And also, if you're listening to us on the podcast services, don't forget to subscribe. We don't want you to miss a single episode of Soul Sessions with Creative Mind. I'm Deborah Burnt Maldonado. I'm here with Dr. Rob, signing out.